Hello, everybody, and welcome to the TF1 show. Now, I'm very excited on today's episode to welcome Mike from F1 Fanatics or Fanatics F1. I think it's F1 Fanatics, right? That's the right way around.
It is F1 Fanatics. Fanatics F1, I think, is the Twitter handle just to confuse everyone.
Yes, I see. Well, Mike, please tell the ladies and gentlemen a bit about yourself and why you are so qualified to join me on today's discussion.
Well, I don't know if qualified is the right word. I'm just like any other F1 fan. Any other F1 who just spouts their opinion out there, and some people tend to listen, so that's always good to know. Basically, I have F1 Fanatics YouTube channel. Like, Tinnis, we've done kind of podcasts and things. It's just basically a channel. If you love F1, hopefully enjoy the kind of stuff we do on a channel, kind of driver rivalry stuff. Driver ratings after Grand Prix. I know, obviously, Tinnis, you have your driver ratings with the F1 community averaging out. There's been some interesting ones there, and
indeed,
certainly some interesting ones from the team we're going to be talking about today. But yeah, thank you for having me on, mate. I really do appreciate it, and hopefully we'll have an amazing chat.
Cool. So just so everybody knows, I will also be putting Mike's details, and I guess if F1 Fanatics' details and links in the description of whichever platform you're listening or watching this on. So please look out for that, and please go and support them. They have a brilliant channel with really, really cool content. So please go have a look. So let's, Mike, jump into our little topic for today. Now, maybe for some background, like quite a few debates, or at least topics that I have on this podcast recently, it started with a bit of a debate on Twitter where we spoke about Alex Albon and what's been happening. And then before we know it, we were talking about the Red Bull driver setup in general. And then we started reflecting on, Red Bull as a race team and what they were doing and sort of their philosophy. And it just sort of, spiraled out from there. And we thought, why not have a bit more of a structured discussion on the podcast, and at least, in more than 270 characters, lay out our arguments and have a bit of a think about what has been going on at Red Bull. Because, Mike, we've spoken a lot, and, so many people on YouTube and so many sort of commentators in the media and so forth have been focusing on Ferrari and obviously their very dramatic sort of downward spiral this year. And I think that sort of spared Red Bull a bit of flack, because, to be honest, and we're definitely going to, talk about all of the different aspects over this episode, but Red Bull has also been struggling in the last couple of years. I mean, yes, they have gotten the odd win here or there, but, for a team that prides itself in being four-time world champions, four-time consecutive world champions, one of the top teams, in the modern F1, they actually haven't been that successful. So, Mike, let's maybe begin with the drivers, and I guess where our little discussion started on Twitter with Alex Albon. Now, maybe you tell us and the ladies and gentlemen what your thoughts are currently about Albon and his position at Red Bull.
I think if anyone follows the channel or follows me on social media, they know that I've been quite open in my criticism of Alexander Albon, and at times I admit it's probably been maybe overly unfair, but I suppose I view Alex Albon in a lot of different ways to what people are viewing Albon as. They're viewing Red Bull in a current state. I'm viewing Red Bull as a team who want to be challenging Mercedes and want to be competing at the top of F1, because that's essentially what they are. And so Alex Albon, I think, clearly he's a talented driver. I don't think anyone ever questions the fact that he's clearly talented. He, performed well against, very good drivers during the junior categories. Didn't win a kind of junior championship, I don't think, but was part of the Red Bull Academy very early in his karting career and went on. But late, he was going to go to Formula E, wasn't he? And then was a late kind of change into Formula One with Toro Rosso. And then 6 months into his career, he suddenly finds himself in Red Bull. And credit where credit's due. He did, I think it was blown out of proportion at the time. I think he did an okay job. He certainly did better than Gasly in that Red Bull. But considering it was his rookie season, I think you have to give him credit. He's gone in, he's been rushed. He doesn't understand this car. And he was pretty unlucky not to get a podium in Brazil 2019 because although he did leave space on the inside for Hamilton, he can't account really for Hamilton going for a move that he should have never been, especially like a 6-time world champion at the time. And he can consider himself pretty unlucky in that situation. And that could maybe be a spur of things that were to come, because the next race we would have in Austria 2020 would be when, he came to blows with Hamilton again, which potentially cost him not only a podium, but his first race win. That obviously we've seen this weekend, Pierre Gasly win at Monza. So, look, Albon is talented, but Red Bull are trying to challenge Mercedes, and he's inexperienced, he's young, he's a developing driver, and he's not good enough for that seat as things currently stand if we're looking at 2020 in terms of, is he ready for that seat right now? No, he's not. In a few years' time, I don't know. That's another debate probably.
Okay, so a couple of questions right now. Let me just make it also very clear that I am very much a supporter of Alex Albon. I think he needs to be protected. He needs to be nurtured as the delicate flower that he is, in my mind at least. But so I would maybe want to ask you, Mike, do you think, and we can talk about Gasly just now because he's quite an interesting one to talk about, especially after, the race weekend that we just had. Do you think Red Bull is doing enough for the driver in that second seat, be it Albon or Gasly?
I think Gasly, no. I think they were very quick to throw him under the bus. Albon, I would say, I don't know really what else Red Bull can do to support the guy. Publicly, they've been very positive about him. Whenever he's had a bad race, they said he hasn't had a bad race, and they've been supportive about him in the press, and they're saying they're very happy with his performances. They'll say like his pace in clear air is good compared and comparable to Max Verstappen's. Marco, obviously, recently before the weekend of Monza, was coming out about they've got different parts on the car. And I don't, everyone talks about Red Bull being a toxic environment. Maybe. Obviously, I think a lot of people are drawing conclusions from Drive to Survive. And the way they handled, I think Gasly, we all accept, was the right decision. He wasn't performing to the level of what needed to be in the second seat of a Red Bull, but he didn't deserve to be treated in the way that he found out, not even through Red Bull. I think it was in the media that he'd lost his seat. Wow. I believe that was through Drive to Survive. I might be wrong on that one, but I'm convinced he didn't find out directly.
I can't remember the situation exactly, but be that as it may.
Anyway, they were saying he's seat safe, and then like 8 days later or whatever it was, he's out of the seat. And they completely mistreated Gasly, and Gasly's shown incredible inner strength and mental toughness to go, you know what, screw them, I'm going to prove them wrong. I know I'm a talented driver, I know I'm a good driver, and I can compete in F1. I'm going to do what I can. And with Albon, I think they've given him everything he can. The harsh reality is, the big issue is probably what we'll talk about in here, is both Gasly and Albon were promoted too early. They were young drivers developing in Formula One, and it takes time. And Red Bull have a privilege that no other F1 team has. I know Ferrari kind of have it with the second seat at Alfa Romeo, but they have an entire other team on the grid that is solely there to develop their drivers, that's competitive in the midfield, no spotlight, they can just perform, they can just kind of learn. And obviously what Gasly's done, amazing performance at Monza, and that's where Albon should have been for the rest of the 2019 season and for the rest of this season, because he wasn't ready for that spotlight. But can they do any more for him? I don't think so. I just don't think he's got the experience and understanding of a Formula One car to be able to solve the issues that is a very difficult Red Bull car this season, like you said.
So let's maybe touch on the Red Bull car. Do you think a contributing factor to, I guess, the differing treatment between Gasly and Albon, if obviously if I had to compare, I'd fully agree that sort of Red Bull's attitude and I guess the face that Red Bull is presenting to the media with Albon compared to with Gasly is completely different. But do you think that is down to the fact that I think Red Bull realized that firstly, it's maybe a bit more difficult environment than what they anticipated, and secondly, that the car itself might be quite a tricky one to drive, and that they realize, maybe it wasn't actually Gasly. And I'll talk about, we can compare Gasly and Albon a bit more closely just now, but that it maybe wasn't down to or 100% down to Gasly's inability, but more as well due to the fact that the Red Bull just isn't that easy of a car to drive quickly.
I think historically, top cars, I know the Mercedes looks an absolute dream to drive, but that's also, it's a different thing because they had the advantage, and then for their smoother gains come from developing that car in becoming a better car to drive. The problem with Red Bull is they've got such a pace gap that they've had to try and catch up. Is they have to try probably more drastic things, and that's
more radical than the aerodynamics on that car.
Absolutely, and this is my big issue with them in terms of why Ricciardo and Verstappen was the dream lineup. They had it perfect. Experience of Ricciardo, he was from the academy. Max Verstappen kind of is a Red Bull junior, but he was picked up late, wasn't he? He was essentially fast-tracked into the system. He wasn't really a Red Bull junior. I suppose you could say he's a Red Bull junior because he did most of his learning in Formula One at the age of 17 or however old he was when he got dumped into the sport. But, that was a dream. They didn't act like a big and successful team when Ricciardo left, because I know you're a big fan of Carlos Sainz as well. In Carlos Sainz, if they wanted to stick with their ready-made junior program, he'd shown glimpses at Renault, or he at least was the more experienced one to put into the seat ahead of Pierre Gasly. But Red Bull, for a pride issue, I think we've spoken about this before, kind of didn't want, because the partnership soured so much with Renault, they didn't want it to be seen that they were taking the guy that Renault rejected and Renault were taking the guy that Red Bull really wanted. They didn't want to show that as a weakness in competitor, even though Carlos Sainz, if they wanted to be in the program, was the best option. And for me, I think I look back to their successful time. Red Bull, fantastic junior in Sebastian Vettel. Once in a generational talent. Well, not once in generation, but he's one of the top talents of his generation, being brilliant. That's what Max Verstappen is. We all know how good he is. But who did they partner alongside Sebastian Vettel? Mark Webber, an experienced guy. He'd kind of been a journeyman in the sport. He knew how to set up a car. He knew kind of how to handle an F1 car. His development feedback was probably brilliant, and he had a chance in 2010 to fight for the world title with an inexperienced Seb. But, his feedback and building that team was probably invaluable, but he was outside their program. I didn't understand why they didn't just go, let's go get I don't know, at that time, they probably could have gone and got a Sergio Perez or something. Or a Hulkenberg. Perfect. Would have been, take him from Renault. How much would that have been? Renault would have been upset if that had kind of switched. Hulkenberg would have, exactly. It would have been another great shout, kind of put in that seat. That's what I think a top team like Mercedes would have done, say if Bottas had left. So I don't understand why Red Bull didn't do that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, right? Because, and maybe just to go back on the Carlos Sainz issue, there were also rumors that I think there was quite a lot of bad blood between Sainz and Red Bull when he bartered the deal to go to Renault. I think I think they wanted to keep Sainz for another year at Toro Rosso, and Sainz didn't want that, or his management didn't want that. And then there was a whole sort of shakedown, and then Sainz sort of ended up with this loan agreement to go to Renault for the period that he was there. But again, I think you touched on something really key there with Red Bull, and that's a pride issue. And I think this is something that has bitten them now, especially. I think when they had the luxury of like 4 or 5 juniors to pick from and feed them into the Toro Rosso team, and then, allow them to develop a bit, like what they did with Jean-Eric Verne and Daniel Ricciardo, where they sort of had both of them in that Toro Rosso seat for a while. And then when the opportunity came for them to pick one of the 2 drivers to put into the top team, they then went for Ricciardo. But at that point, Ricciardo was quite experienced. And I think sort of that strategy of theirs was sensible at that point, given the amount of drivers that they had. I mean, they had Felix da Costa coming up as well. Like, they had so many great talents they could choose from at that point. And I think this was sort of, when Daniel left, they were so blindsided that it felt like, to me at least, they didn't really have a game plan, like a sort of a strategy to deal with Ricciardo leaving, keeping their pride to one side as well, because obviously then Helmut Marko refuses for some inexplicable reason to promote from outside of Red Bull. And I think, obviously they didn't want to do Sainz because they had some sort of drama with Carlos Sainz. They didn't want to promote somebody else that wasn't in the Red Bull family. So who were they left with? Pierre Gasly, Brendan Hartley, or Daniel Kvyat, I think, was still part of the Ferrari, I think, setup at that point in time. And he was
the test driver during the 2018 season, yeah.
Yeah, so that left them the 2 options, and both of them incredibly inexperienced. And I think we can maybe pin that down as sort of the start of all of the issues, because it's now 2020, and that, truth be told, haven't really been able to sort out the issues yet with regards to the driver lineup. And I don't know, Mike, what do you think? They now obviously have Albon in the seat at the moment. They have Gasly doing really, really well at Toro Rosso, a race winner now, be it a slightly fortunate race win, but still, such a strong season from him so far. Kvyat in the 3rd car, and then the other seat in the Toro Rosso. Where to from here for Red Bull with regard to their drivers?
It's a difficult one. I still think the experienced option is the best bet for them as it currently stands, in terms of getting someone to support Max, because they've got to convince Max now, because he's not going to wait around forever, because there is no doubt about how good Max Verstappen is. And, if Red Bull continue to deliver a car that isn't good enough and put all the pressure on him to develop a car, because, the main development is definitely coming from him rather than the Gaslys and the Albons.
But let me maybe jump in there and just ask a question. Like, do you think at this point, Max even, like, we know what an excellent driver he is and like how talented he is. Do you think Max has the experience yet to really like lead up a team and develop and really drive like design direction and development direction and setup and things like that for a team? Where obviously I think we've seen how he can sort of deal with whatever he's given and get the best out of it. But thinking about the team as a whole, and we've, Hamilton has spoken so much about, over the last 2 or 3 years about, do you remember when the Mercedes car was, the diva, and how difficult they found it to drive, and it was really, really hard car to sort of deal with in specific situations, and how Hamilton has been saying how they've just been chipping away at sorting out the issues that Mercedes had. And now, as you mentioned earlier, this 2020 version of the car looks like literally the best car to drive. Like, everybody just marvels at how incredible that car looks in the onboard and how stable it is and how amazing it looks. Do you think Max has that ability at this point in his career to help Red Bull in that sense? Or is that also something that's going to come over time?
Well, he is very experienced for a guy of his age. So although inexperienced in years, he's been in F1 for 5 years, and he will be good. I think he would have learned stuff from Daniel Ricciardo, because we've seen Ricciardo now outside the Red Bull program at Renault and seen just the improvements they've made and the team harmony that they've done, and he's walked in and being a team leader at that guy. So he would have learned having a close relationship from Ricciardo in that aspect. But I think for Red Bull to challenge someone as good as Mercedes, does Max have the ability to take them to that next level by himself? Absolutely not. It can't. I don't know if anyone does, because what you're looking at is probably the most, well, it will be the most dominant team in F1 history and probably the best team in F1 history. I know obviously they've had large gaps out of the sport, so they won't have the number of race wins, number of championships or whatever in that one. But in terms of when they've competed in the sport, I'm pretty sure they only haven't won the championships between 2010 and 2013. Because I'm pretty sure when they entered F1 in the 50s, they won both championships back then. I might be wrong on that front.
But they were very successful back in the day. I think there's no denying that.
Exactly. I'm pretty sure they were the only team that Fangio won a title with twice during his 5 world championships. But I just think it's unfair on Max, and it just doesn't make sense. If I was running the team, I mean, there's a lot more things. Budget probably comes into play. They probably look, if we promote from within, we can then spend less on driver wages than if we go and get an experienced guy. But in 2019, if they wanted an experienced guy, Daniel Kvyat had come back in 2019 incredibly well, had that podium in Germany in that wet race. Albon was doing all right against Kvyat, but Kvyat was definitely the stronger out of the two for me during that period. He'd had that year of test experience with Ferrari, so working in another top team with development knowledge, seeing how they do things, giving feedback, improving that side of things. He, at the halfway point of 2019, would have been the perfect driver switch for me if they wanted to promote from within. But again, they made the same mistake twice in terms of put all their eggs in the inexperienced basket. And it's incredibly unfair on Gasly and Albon, because you're asking them to do something that not even Max really coped with, because he struggled early doors within Formula One. And he was allowed to develop out the spotlight almost pretty much. But we could all see how good Max Verstappen is. And in the kindest respect to Pierre Gasly and Alex Albon, I don't think they're on Max Verstappen's level. And I don't think they should be really at this stage of their career, considering how long Max has had. So unrealistic expectations they've put on their juniors, and it just seems a really bizarre decision.
It sounds like a bit of a lose-lose. I actually like the way you phrased it, because neither Gasly or Albon wins in this situation, because essentially they keep being compared. They're constantly compared to Verstappen and to each other now with Albon. I mean, the amount of sort of comparisons you see. Literally today, I saw some graphic showing, after 8 races, how many points that Gasly scored, Red Bull versus Albon. So that's the one thing. Then they're being compared directly to Verstappen, who's operating at such a high level at the moment, given his experience and sort of being so well embedded within the team, which is always going to, 99 out of 100 times end in tears for a driver of Gasly's and Verstappen and Albon's experience to be measured against someone like Verstappen. Verstappen loses because, as you said, he's now being placed in this very, very unenviable position to somehow lead this team single-handedly. When last did you really see Max being supported in a Grand Prix by a teammate? I can't think of one example or in one race since Gasly was in that car, and this is the beginning of last year, where you could sort of see the two Red Bulls being able to play off each other with strategy, or at least the other car causing a bit of trouble, like Bottas is able to do so often for Mercedes. So that's a losing situation for Verstappen as well. And I guess, I don't know if you have anything else to say about the driver specifically, but I want to quickly just touch on the Red Bull car itself, where it does seem like this year's car just isn't that great. I think it feels like they're sort of masked by the fact that the Ferrari is so horrible. So they are less bad than what Ferrari is. And yes, there were cases we saw, obviously, when Max won in Silverstone, and Barcelona, it was decent-ish as well. But I mean, Italy was really bad. Spa wasn't great either. I don't know. I don't know what you think about the Red Bull car this year.
It's a difficult car, but I think it's a car that clearly has pace. And the main problem probably is the Honda power unit, which would there have been, that's another one, is the Renault one. Because when you're pursuing Mercedes, who are at the top of their game, you probably can't afford to take too many steps backwards to go forward. And Honda was probably a necessary step back to go forward. But if you compare, obviously, the relative success within the sport, Honda have only ever been successful within Formula One in the mid to late 80s and early 90s with Senna as well. They haven't been successful at other time, where Renault have had staggered periods through the sport where they've been able to develop an engine to a good enough standard and also had an understanding of it. So they would have had to have gone backwards. And I think Honda have come on leaps and bounds, even in this short period. But Ferrari have stitched Red Bull up. They've stitched up all the competitors, because with their kind of fuel injection, was it oil injection into, I don't know what exactly it was doing to the engine. Basically the sensor, it was like short circuiting it, wasn't it? So they were getting more.
The alias thing he was doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they were essentially bypassing that fuel flow meter. They were essentially sending out signals to confuse it in a sense.
Absolutely. So yeah, that was it, and kind of triggering that system. But that forced Mercedes, who are so good, going, oh my God, well, we've always had an engine advantage. We've now got to catch up with Ferrari. They're the new kind of game changers in that. And Honda, if that didn't happen, Honda's step up this year probably would have been a lot closer to Mercedes than if Mercedes hadn't been pushed that far. And I think aerodynamically, it's always a tricky car, I think, to find it right. I think that I'm right. They're the only team, they're at least the only top team who operate with a high rake.
I think to that level, to that degree of high rake, that's like Adrian Newey's sort of calling card. Is he believes in this high rake philosophy? Which
I don't know. Is Adrian? We often talk about Adrian Newey is one of the greatest minds ever to kind of participate in F1 engineering, and you can just stack up that with the amount of championship winning cars that he has been involved in one way or another. But I don't honestly know the answer to this question. But how much of the personnel have changed in Red Bull since 2005? Because they've had the same team principal in that entirety of time. Adrian Newey, since about, I think, 2008, has been involved in it. Helmut Marko's been involved in it since day one. Has things just gone a little bit stale? Because, Mercedes tend to refresh things reasonably well. I know they've kept most of the same team as well, and F1 teams do. But if things weren't working in terms of catching Mercedes, did they need to bring in fresh ideas?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And it feels like Red Bull is like throwing the same thing at the wall, hoping it'll stick this time. It feels like, to me at least, where if you look at someone like Mercedes, I mean, they have been able to deal with Paddy Lowe departing and successfully been able to replace him with James Allison. I mean, they have had, Aldo Costa that's left the team, who was so instrumental, for them as well. They've seamlessly been able to replace him and continue in the successful way that they've been going on this year. Andy Cowell, and he's left. It seems like they have a really, really strong sort of succession plan in place for all of these key personnel or key individuals when they do decide to leave the team for whatever reason that may be. And I have to say, I find it quite interesting that Red Bull has been able to keep such a sort of consistent team makeup over the, how many last 15 years. The fact that Adrian Newey has decided to stick around for so long. I'm trying to, I don't know whether, is Rocky, Seb Vettel's engineer, still at the team? Not sure.
I'm not sure, actually. I'm not sure. I mean, I know a lot of the engineering guys are, because it's one of the key ones, isn't it, that Seb always goes down to the Red Bull garage and catches up, because they're most of the people who are still there from the championship winning times. And I suppose you can go, well, these guys can be good in a championship winning thing. But I look at teams like Renault and McLaren when things haven't gone their way. Historically, well, especially McLaren, historically one of the best teams in Formula One, they took a serious look. I mean, they got rid of Ron Dennis, who'd been in since, the early 80s. And it's been a rocky path, but they now look like a team massively going in the right direction, with the CEO of Zach Brown and team principal of Andreas Seidel. And I know other key personnel have been behind the scenes, and they've changed up things with drivers, but made sense. They've always seemed to keep like a core driver in. It hasn't kind of been brash decisions. And if I do that in comparison with Red Bull, yes, they've competitively been more further up in the constructors, but they haven't challenged at any point during the turbo hybrid era. So although McLaren have had much lower lows than them, arguably you could say, have they really done any different during this time? They've been about as close to Mercedes as each other.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And it's interesting, and I don't know if you know the reason for this. I don't think anybody knows the reason for this, because if they knew, I think Red Bull would hire them on the spot. But how is it that every single year, like for the last 4 years, they finish strong? Every season they finish really, really, positively. They're basically on pace with the Mercs, can challenge them, every second or third race, Verstappen especially. And then when you think, okay, you know what, it seems like they have a really good foundation to build on. Now let's see how much more they can develop this concept into the next year, and sort of use that as a good, springboard for that year's championship challenge. And every single year over the last 4 years, at least, it's ended up being, we've had this expectation from Red Bull, given, their history and the amazing minds and talent that they have in the team. And then they just start off the year slowly. It's always some sort of struggle, some sort of thing on the car that isn't working, something that they didn't anticipate. And then they sort of spend the first half of the season trying to figure it out. And then when they figured it out, then again, they're sort of back on pace and it's going well. But I just can't seem to, in my mind, understand how this has been such a recurring problem, whether it's maybe Mercedes just outperforming themselves so dramatically over the winter that Red Bull in comparison looks poor or looks poorer off, or I can't figure it out for myself.
Well, I think 2017 and 2018, they were getting there. And especially, I think at the back end of 2018, maybe they potentially had the best car at the back end of the season. But two things happened in 2018. One, they lost Daniel Ricciardo, and two, they made the switch from Honda to Renault. Mm. And those, for a Formula One team, I think are quite huge things to kind of overcome. One is an experienced driver who was being competitive and pushing Daniel, probably giving brilliant development feedback and really driving that team forward. And in Honda, well, it had a season. I mean, the seasons with McLaren were awful. It had a season with Toro Rosso at the time, which was all right, decent, enough to kind of convince themselves to kind of go the main team to go for it. But it was going to be always a step down from Renault to hoping to go step forward. And yeah, that's where I kind of feel right, where Ferrari were on the rise through 2017, 2018, and somehow managed to Ferrari it in only the way that they know how.
Special talents.
They're a team for another topic, but Red Bull, I think those step backwards to then also mount a challenge. But the problem is now, and I think they were one of the big anti budget cap teams because it was an advantage over the had in the midfield. They've stepped back to kind of go forward, but in 2022 it's kind of been a level playing field, and the Renault engine now looks better again. The Ferrari engine, they're lucky that it's dropped off because they'd be pretty much on a par with Renault and Honda, but you'd always back Renault with the money they've got as a... Well, Honda are pumping a load of money in, to be fair, but Honda is just such a difficult one. They haven't really had much success in Formula One, and even as much as this weekend in Monza, they still seem to have these weird engine reliability issues that I never quite... I know obviously Renault was awful, but for the last years of Red Bull, but Honda, I never really quite sure what goes wrong with it.
Yeah, the Honda engine is like a bit of a mystery, where at least with the Renault, and look, the 2018 season for Renault was really bad. Like, how many retirements did Ricciardo have from that engine? Like, it was something ridiculous. But I do want to give credit where credit's due, because I think that Renault engine is like sort of the low down star of the season so far. Like, I feel it's really like gone under the radar or underappreciated how good the Renault engine is this year, because obviously the Mercedes one caught all the headlines, but both in the McLaren and in the Works team, that engine seems to be going really, really well. Like, we saw how quick McLaren is typically, at the tail end of qualifying before, I guess, the whole engine mode ban. But it's an interesting one. And I guess maybe we can then move over into sort of the last little series of questions I want to ask you, Mike. Where to from here from Red Bull? Because they now have the Honda engine. They have Max Verstappen, the second driver. They have Albon at the moment, but where to from here? Do you think they can get their house in order before 2022 to finally mount a championship challenge? Because I don't see it happening next year. I'm sorry. I don't think they're close enough.
I was going early kind of season. We're seeing the unreliability of the Mercedes and going, the optimistic F1 fan in me was like, maybe there's some hope because of talking about it before. They're historically good at developing through a season. And the main thing is this year that it won't be a chassis change. And I think that's where Red Bull have, for some reason, struggled. They haven't been able to take their new changes in the new season and get everything working quickly, where Mercedes just come out the blocks firing every single season. And once you give those guys a head start, there ain't no catching them. They're just so good. Once they get an advantage in the lead, they're so good at doing it. So that was a little bit of hope. But yeah, I agree. I haven't seen enough from them to go from it. And with Alex Albon and the way that they're speaking about him, I think they're in it for the long haul. And maybe, and it's frustrating because I think so many teams are doing this, but they've almost written off these 2 seasons. They were like, they probably came out the blocks and go, okay, let's see. Are we competing with Mercedes? All right, Mercedes are stupidly quick. Right, forget about this season. Forget about here. Albon, let's nurture him. I think he can be, in the future, a really good number 2 to Max Verstappen, because he could probably be the Bottas for Red Bull in terms of he's not going to have the ability. I just can't see it from any of his junior career that he will show anything in his time in F1 to be able to match Max Verstappen in ability-wise.
He had glimpses. Like, that's why I think in GP3, it wasn't GP3 or Formula 3, when he was Charles's teammate, when it was him, Charles, Nick de Vries. I can't remember the fourth one. But there, he actually had it was very close between him and Charles in terms of winning the championship that year for GP3. So I think, as you say, I think it is in there. And also, I think, given that Red Bull, and it's sort of the attitude now for everybody that isn't called Mercedes, to sort of use this season and next season to, I don't know, get their house in order or get their ducks in a row, that they do have a bit of an opportunity now with Albon to really be slow and steady with him. Like, do not expect miracles to happen immediately, to try and see if they can, get into chip away at, a tenth and a half or half a tenth every race weekend. Like we have been seeing, I feel, and this might again be the optimist in me, like you were optimistic at the beginning of the season, but I think Albon is getting slightly closer to Verstappen over one lap. I think Monza.
I'd actually agree with you, and I think actually one of this weekend from the F1 community, Albon probably received his harshest criticism, where I think it was probably unfair because the Red Bull didn't seem to have any fake pace at Monza. He was 0.3 off Max in qualifying, so I thought that was pretty decent considering that the Red Bull clearly was a struggle and it's going to be a handful, and obviously the admittance at different parts. But I don't know how you feel about that comment. I feel like that's just a throwaway defending comment because I'm pretty sure at all times during the year, cars are running different parts to trial things. I know Haas last year, basically Grosjean and Magnussen were running different setups, trying to figure out the problems within the car. So that's quite a normal thing. Historically, obviously, Red Bull, Mark Webber having the different front nose, wasn't it? The better one to Sebastian Vettel when he went on and won Silverstone. So there's elements to that in that, but I'm a big believer in you make your own luck in terms of it, and you've got to go and perform. And turn one at Monza, hey, it's turn one. If you're back in the pack, it's always a tight chicane, that first one at Monza. He was unlucky that he made contact. It damaged his car beyond being competitive in the field. So although he finished P15, he never really stood a chance to do anything better in that race. So he's got better. And I know it's a big thing we've spoken about in terms of I haven't seen him compete against the guys at the top. And that's what disappoints me because, yes, he had the overtake. It was brilliant in Brazil, actually. Both Red Bulls, didn't they? They went past two Ferraris. I think they were at that kind of safety car restart, which obviously allowed Max to kind of shoot off to distance and smash it, and Albon obviously get further up the field. But I haven't seen that on a regular occasion from him. He hasn't been able to compete, and especially finding some way to compete against the Valtteri Bottas or the Ferraris last year. It's a little bit disappointing, and he clearly can overtake. I think he's still learning. He's a bit too bold. I would actually say, I know overtaking was Gasly's weakness in the past, but I'd much rather a driver who overtakes like Gasly than who overtakes like Alex Albon, because I feel he puts his car in compromised positions too much, that accidents do happen, and he's still learning that. But Red Bull clearly don't mind that too much because they're willing to give him time and they've been supportive of it. So that's maybe not an issue. So I think he is improving. I think as much as I criticise him for being now, we're essentially looking at Alex Albon being the finished article in 2022, because I think he's going to drive for them in 2021. I think they're just going to give him the season. He's going to get the media flack again and again. But if he keeps on doing something that's impressing them within the side, that in 2022, when they feel like they might have a competitive car again for a championship, that'll be, the real telling point of whether Alex Albon is good enough to be in a top seat in Formula One.
I think I agree, and I think we can maybe tie it up there just in terms of Albon and Red Bull's future. I don't see any reason for Red Bull to again upset the apple cart at the end of the year, get another driver in for next year, and hope that it works out. I think sort of playing the long game here might work to their advantage. So I think that's probably the best route for them. And I do think that they can in 2022 challenge if Adrian Newey, given sort of the dramatic changes to the aerodynamic regulations, if he can work his magic, I think let's put it like this: if anybody can come up with some sort of a field beating innovation on a new set of regulations like what we're getting, I think Adrian Newey is probably going to be the one you want to have in your team. So I think they can get back to where they want to be. But as we've now discussed over the last, 3/4 of an hour almost, they have a lot of things that they need to figure out and sort out before we get there. And I do also think that Red Bull needs to be held to account a bit more often. I mean, we are so tough on Ferrari, and we haven't been that tough on Red Bull over the last couple of years. And I think, they also need a bit of a kick up the backside every now and then.
It hasn't been good enough. And if I was Red Bull, I would seriously be worried, because they're not historically a team in F1. Obviously, they're one of the new teams in 2005, taking over the Jaguar team. And they very quickly capitalized on the rules and regulations, which obviously they could do again. But, they didn't quite do it in 2009. And then 2010 to 2013, they nailed it. And they didn't compete financially with what Mercedes invested into the engine. I think Mercedes almost invested double, I'm pretty sure, at least 100 million more of what Red Bull were able to invest in the V6 hybrid compared to the very good Renault engine that they had in the V8 era. I would be worried because I think McLaren, Aston Martin and Renault are my ones to watch in 2022. I just think they're going about their business very well. McLaren and Renault more so. I think they've made some very smart additions behind the scenes. Both have got very good driver lineups going forward, and Renault can obviously have a look at Ocon. If he doesn't do it, maybe Pierre Gasly's an option for them in the future. They've got some decent junior drivers, but they're not restricted to getting guys from their academy. They will pick guys on the best field, and it's still a manufacturer. And McLaren have Norris and Ricciardo, which I think is an amazing lineup. And Mercedes, exactly. And Mercedes just has continued. They will be successful because they are such a good team and obviously committed to their future to 2025. Hamilton will be there for a while. Whether George Russell was there in 2022 or hopefully it's not Bottas. I feel like he's had his shot.
I think this season, if this season doesn't tell Mercedes what they need to know, then I don't know what more they need. Like last year already, I was like saying, guys, let's get Russell in that Mercedes. Bottas hasn't been doing the business. That Mercedes would just use the Charles Leclerc model that Ferrari has used. They take the punts. I mean, it hasn't worked out for Red Bull, right? But I think Russell has now proven himself to be, I think, ready. But this is a discussion for a completely different episode. So let's not get trapped in the Mercedes driver market. I think, Mike, let's maybe sort of call that our conclusion, that Red Bull needs to be very worried going ahead into 2022 because there are big opposition potentially coming their way. I want to ask
also Max won't hang around forever.
Yes.
Max will be looking for moves to other teams if they look in a better position.
100%. You never know, right? You just said Renault, McLaren, if they're looking really strong in the regulation change, they're not going to mind getting Max into that car. If Max wants to come, they're probably going to be like, cool, we'll make room. So Red Bull has much to think about in conclusion. And I guess to you, the listener, I also just want to ask, what do you think about Red Bull? What do you think is going to happen with that team over the next couple of years? And if you have thoughts, and I'm sure you do, the internet usually has thoughts, put it in the comments and I'll be happy to engage with you as well after this episode goes out. And I just then, given that we're at the end, I want to thank you, Mike, for taking the time to come on and have a lovely, I have to say, I really enjoyed this discussion. It's always so refreshing to, just have, I guess, a semi-serious discussion about, the goings on in Formula One, and to talk to somebody so knowledgeable and passionate. It's always an absolute treat. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to come and join me.
Oh, mate, no problem at all. It's been, like I said, it's been a brilliant chat, and it's what we all love as F1 fans, in terms of essentially our opinions mean nothing at the end of the day, but we like to think that they do mean something. But it's part of the enjoyment of our sport. We talk about things like this. What we discuss today won't change what happens at Red Bull, but it's fascinating to see what's going to happen and what's going to develop in that situation, because they have been in recent times one of the best teams within the sport, but they are a stumbling team like Ferrari. And will they be caught out with it? But also, guys, if you're watching this and you haven't already, please do subscribe to the TF1 show. Brilliant content, brilliant podcast. I do appreciate, obviously, Tinnis coming on. It's been brilliant. So thank you, mate.
You're making me blush, Mike. No, at this advanced age. No, it's been a treat. And as Mike said, listen to Mike. He knows what he's talking about. Please, if you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button. Please also, subscribe if you want to hear more of me. I mean, you can decide if you want to hear more of me. Please do. And I'm sure we'll have Mike on, very soon as well. I think he's still to join one of my little race recaps at the end of a Sunday. So I'm definitely going to negotiate with him to come on, maybe discuss one of our, do one of our little post-race live discussions. So yeah, thank you so much everybody for listening, and I'll be back very soon with, as far as I'm aware, it's going to be the Mugello race. So look forward to that, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye everybody.